Welcome to this episode of the Biometrics Leadership Lab Live. We are here to support you on your biometrics journey, giving you the tools and knowledge you need to move from lead to leader. And today we are talking about medical writing in the era of ICH E6R3 and M11. Are you ready for it? Thank you for joining us live. And if you are watching a replay, thank you for taking the time to catch up. You can ask questions on the event notice on LinkedIn and we will see them, but we can't respond in writing during the live broadcast. So if we don't get to your question, look for an answer after the event in the comments. Before we get started, let's do some quick introductions. I am Amanda Cross, founder of Crossfield Coaching and Consulting, a biometrics and clinical data advisory, helping small and mid-sized companies and teams manage data risk, integration, oversight, and governance. With decades of experience in clinical research, from statistician to chief operating officer, I leverage my cross-functional experience and training to help teams have confidence in their data integrity. And now to my guest, Jules.
Hi, I'm Jules Kovacevic. I've been a medical writer for over 20 years. A lot of my background is within CROs. 2 years ago, or nearly 2 years ago, started my own company with my business partner, a medical writing company. I'm also very involved with the European Medical Writers Association. At present, I'm the conference director, but I have served as the education officer as well. And I also chair the regulatory writing special interest group. So this topic is very much in my wheelbase. And Anne?
Hi, I'm Anne McDonough. I'm a freelance medical writer, which I've been for nearly 20 years. And I've worked in different roles in clinical R&D for over 30 years. These days, I work primarily on early phase studies with small biotech companies, writing regulatory documents and operational documents, including a lot of protocols. And I also provide training in medical writing, including workshops at the European Medical Writers Association conferences.
Great. Well, thank you both for taking some time to join me today. And just to level set with where we are, ICH E6R3 emphasizes a quality culture, quality by design, critical to quality factors, stakeholder engagement, and proportional risk-based approaches. M11 introduces a harmonized protocol template and a technical specification, so protocols can be structured consistently and exchanged electronically. M11 can be described as three pieces: the guidance itself, the template, and the technical specification. So we're going to really focus on protocol development today. And medical writing has always been central to protocol development, of course, but R3 and M11 seem to be making that role much more visible. Do you think that these guidelines actually change the medical writer's role, or are they simply formalizing what strong medical writers are already doing?
Well, go ahead. I was going to say, I'm going to set you up, Amanda, by challenging your premise, which is that I'm not sure, and I'd love to hear Jules' experience, that medical writers are often involved or are always central to writing protocols. Certainly, as someone who writes CSRs and submission documents, I get a lot of protocols where I really don't think there's a medical writer that's been involved. You'll have more experience with your CRO experience, Jules. Do you find that to be true?
Yeah, I think that we bring experience from multiple protocols, whereas maybe other people within the team have only written a handful. We've been involved in so many different protocols, so many different designs, so many different ways of bringing that data. And then obviously our endpoint is the CSR. So we have to make sure that the protocol is fit to be able to write a good quality CSR on the back of it, and then ultimately the submission in the future.
Exactly, and that's what I think I see not happening a lot when I'm getting to write the CSR, because there's no thinking about how the CSR is going to look. Sorry.
Okay, so the very first takeaway is make sure there's a medical writer involved in your protocol. And I think, Anne and I were talking earlier this week, and we were kind of saying sometimes it feels like it's a level of information sharing that people should already kind of take on board. And I think that there's a place where those of us who are, let us say, seasoned, everything is so much second nature to us that when you're starting out or you're earlier in your career, you kind of forget some of these or you don't know some of these steps to take. So if you're involved in a protocol and you don't have a medical writer on board, now would be the time to get one, because as these two ladies are saying, it's really going to streamline the endpoint, which is the CSR, and moving to submission if you can have a quality document from the beginning. Let's talk about a couple of points from R3, which is around the patient voice and endpoints and feasibility. How can medical writers help ensure that the patient input is not just kind of mentioned in the protocol, like, oh yeah, we had a patient group review this, but that they're actually reflecting the patient view in the study design? And actually, feel free to comment on, is it even feasible for a patient group or the patient voice to drive the study design?
I think what we've got to go back to is the study concept, and you've got to get the patient voice involved right at the study concept and a medical writer. So the endpoints to get enrollment, to get people to stay within the study, and this again is something from a seasoned medical writer, they will know that an endpoint that is of no interest to the study population is not going to encourage people to stay in that study. If it means nothing to them, why would they continue in the study? Why would they take time out of their daily routine to be in the study? So the patient voice will be able to give you that information about what is actually relevant and what is important to those patients, because ultimately that's what we should be doing.
Yeah, and I would agree that the patient voice is super important in many kinds of research and many kinds of protocols. But I would also throw in there that, to be sort of quite frank, it isn't at all important in certain kinds of protocols or certain kinds of research, I think. So, for example, I do a lot of healthy volunteer studies. The sites are very well able to represent what they know about their clients from that and the types of people who enroll in studies. And obviously, there aren't any endpoints that are of interest to that group. Also, I do a lot of vaccine research. It's another group where it's sort of really hard to define what is the patient group for a product that pretty much everybody's going to get, or pretty much everybody in a certain risk group or age. Well, when you get into risk groups, perhaps, but certainly like every infant is going to get this, and sort of, I was thinking a lot about this because the first protocol that I've written, second protocol I've written since we've been back from the Medical Writers Conference is an antibiotic, a short-term 5-day antibiotic for UTIs. And again, I think for a lot of these kinds of studies, there's not an identifiable or useful patient group. And I've been, dealing with patient voice back from the 1990s and HIV, and I think it's super important, but that it can't be like many things in clinical research, a one size fits all. You must have patient representation in writing your healthy volunteer protocol, which, we get pushback from journals and things where there isn't. But I think even absent the patient voice, or absent being able to identify a patient voice, we're all patients. We all can think when we're writing protocols, would I want to come to the hospital every month, even if I had a very serious disease, and particularly if I had a very serious disease, would I want to come every week and have blood taken? So I think we've all been patients. We can all think like patients in some ways, and it doesn't let anyone off the hook for writing a patient appropriate, I wouldn't want to say patient-centric, but patient-appropriate protocol.
Don't get me started on patient centricity, but that's a topic for my hot takes and unpopular opinions session. And I think a healthy volunteer study, by definition, doesn't have patients. And I think that, in antibiotic studies, you're kind of like, well, the endpoint is did the infection go away? But I think there is that avenue around what is the patient experience going through the study, and is that working for them, and how are they measuring that? But that's a little bit outside the scope of, say, the endpoint decision. Now,
well, not necessarily though, because that information can then be taken into the study design for the future studies. So the phase 2, for example, the healthy volunteers experience, if there was a bad experience with certain aspects of the design of the healthy volunteers trial, that should then be brought in, and that again then is patient voice is being used from the healthy volunteers as the patient of the voice leading the future design.
Yeah, and I think Anne and I were talking, I keep saying earlier this week, but I think that was just yesterday, around, because this week it's only Tuesday. The HIV studies that you worked on, I guess, in the 90s, like that was really, patient voice became very prevalent, in that era and in that therapeutic area. And I think an analogous group today is kind of rare disease groups, which most people know is very near and dear to me. But what's meaningful for the patients to see improvement on, and what is going to matter to them, and what burden are they going to bear in getting to that endpoint in a clinical trial. And I think patient advocacy groups, PAGs, are getting very vocal and driving a lot of research in that space, primarily because there's not a lot of patients and they don't make a lot of money for drug companies ultimately. But they have a lot of meaning behind them. And I think DMD is a classic example of a disease really driving meaningful endpoints for clinical research.
And I think that's a place where there's a lot of opportunity, because everybody sort of keeps talking about, patients should be driving the endpoints. Well, yes and no. Regulators think they should be driving the endpoints, and I don't think that that's an opinion that they're going to change on. But that said, particularly in the rare disease space, obviously there aren't endpoints established for a lot of these things. And that's where I think patients, both feeding into the protocol, but even at sort of a larger level, can sort of get in the ground floor and say, well, these are the endpoints we care about. Regulators, this is what you should measure. And that voice may be through pharma and through writing protocols, but it is a really good example of where that can happen. Other diseases, I don't know that there will be a lot of movement on established endpoints.
So endpoints are often, if we take out the patient, endpoints are just treated as, say, a clinical or statistical decision, right? What's clinically meaningful, what's statistically measurable. So where does and how does medical writing add value to endpoints in a protocol?
I always view this as kind of the very first thing I look at, and almost the most important thing I look at. I'm sure Jules has the same experience. You get a synopsis, and the endpoints are inconsistent, unclear, you can't operationalize them. And it's the first thing that I always start with, and this is very low tech, is a table in Word, not even Excel, a column of objectives, endpoints, assessments, and stats. So can I line them all up? Do I understand what they all are? And so that's the first thing, clarity and consistency of endpoints.
And I think recently I found a lot of synopses have been written with very sort of fuzzy endpoints, that they're not nailed down, and that doesn't help a medical writer at all. We have to have completely nailed down endpoints to be able to write the CSR. A medical writer is always thinking about that ultimate document, the CSR. So they have to be nailed down.
Yeah, I don't think fuzzy endpoints in a synopsis help anybody,
No.
right? I think that they're kind of a holding pen, I guess, while people think through what they want to do. But you're really stuck there at the synopsis stage until you can nail down some of these endpoints, because that will drive a lot of the procedural aspects that are going into the protocol. So you could think, oh, just write the rest of the protocol and we'll fill out the endpoints when we get there. But
exactly.
no, it's going to drive the schedule of events. It's going to drive the structure of the study. It's going to drive the statistics section, the data management component. So there's a lot of heavy lifting that are done by those fuzzy endpoints that can really halt before you even get to the protocol stage.
And I think that's where we really need our DM and stats colleagues. And again, I work with very small biotech companies. They don't have those people on staff. And I'm always urging them, if you want me to write a protocol, please get a DM person in there. It doesn't have to be a hire, but get a consultant, get a stats consultant, because I've been in clinical R&D for more than 30 years. I think I have some understandings of those things, but I don't have the expertise. So that when I want to know when I write an endpoint and I write the way that it's going to be, the assessment's going to be collected and all of that, that the data manager can say, yes, I can really, build a database, build that CRF pages and everything that do that. And then a stats person says, yes, and then I can really analyze those data that you've collected in this way. And to bring those people in late, after protocol's already been finalized or submitted to a regulatory authority, I think is always a mistake. So that's where we really need you guys. And as I said, please push for medical writers in protocol development, and I'm always pushing for you guys to be included too, because you have a very important role.
Jules, anything to add?
I think the difficulty also comes when you have investigator-led or an investigator dictating the endpoints, because there's lots of, oh, we'd love to know this and we'd love to know that, and then actually the actual clinical meaningfulness to the patients or to the CSR or to moving this project along is not there. And so you need the statistician, you need the data manager, you need the medical writer to bring everything to a point where it's all meaningful for the study to go on. Lots and lots of exploratory endpoints, which are just nice tos, doesn't help anybody.
Okay, we have a question, so we're going to back up a little bit back to the patient voice, because someone is asking, what steps can a medical writer actually take if they notice the patient voice is not being included in protocol design?
I think you should raise it immediately. It is a part, and it is expected to be written in the protocol, the patient voice elements that you are including. Now, whether that's called back or raised by any authority at the moment, I'd say no. But that's not to say that in the future they're not going to raise what exactly have you done with the patient voice. So I would say that the medical writer we should be raising immediately if we see no patient voice included, and assist with finding a patient group or finding a group of people who can review the protocol from a layperson point of view. It doesn't have to be necessarily a patient group, but from someone from a patient, from who has been a patient not involved in clinical research, who can just read it and think, oh yeah, well, that's something that would interest me, or that's something that would just take too much time out of my day, or too much time, or not possible for me to do.
Yeah, and I think I completely agree with that, Jules. And I think one really interesting element of M11 is that in that patient voice section, which is optional to have, it does specifically say that you should say how you've incorporated those things, like into what areas, like the endpoints or the schedule or whatever. So I think that's a really good driver for that. And of course, also the other thing to remember is, M11 aside, a lot of journals are really insisting on this stuff. And I know, and I believe it's the BMJ group, for example. I've written manuscripts for healthy volunteer studies where I have to write the sentence, because if you don't have it, they won't publish it. We had no patient involvement in this study. Even a study where it's completely reasonable to not have, you still have to state that you didn't. And I think that's pushing as well as M11. So even though I agree with you that it's unlikely at this point that a regulator is going to push back, there are other stakeholders involved, and it will only be getting more so.
I go back to our first conversation around medical writing, where Anne, you really said a medical writer is a storyteller, and they're telling the story of the clinical trial or the development program by the time you get to CSR or submission. And there's, whether or not the medical writer is responsible for all of the plot development, let us say, they are responsible for accurately telling what happened. And so anything where you have to write about, but you don't have the information to do so, it's well within a medical writer's purview to bubble that up and say, what are we doing here? Or what are we doing here? Or how will this be managed? Or did we do this? And, I'm a big proponent of, if you don't write it down, it didn't happen. So, depending on what's going on, you ask your questions in an email, or you get it documented in meeting minutes, but that you've got that trail of what decisions were made and why patients were or were not approached, because, you know, there are very valid reasons why there might not be that level of input, but just kind of asking the question and getting that response documented, and knowing what story you're going to tell later in the study.
I mean, we call ourselves regulatory writers, and so we should know the regulations. Our clients maybe don't know the regulations. They've got a lot of other things going on in their minds, so especially small biotechs, they might not be up that M11 is something that encourages the use of patient voice. It's our responsibility and our role to inform our clients as well, in the same way that they're informing us about their products, etc. We should be informing them about the things that they should be doing.
Yeah, and that's the value of the medical writer, right? They're not a word processor. I think we talked about that last time, you know, and they're not experts in copy and paste, but, you know, you are owning the regulatory compliance of the documentation of the study. And so that gives you the authority, I guess, so to speak, in your subject area of expertise to ask for these things, and make sure that you're guiding your clients, whether it's internal to your company or external to your company, to make sure that those items are covered.
Yeah.
So E6R3 also puts more emphasis on designing quality into the trial from the start. Quality by design, who hasn't heard that lately? But what does that mean? What are you doing practically in medical writing terms in order to ensure that quality by design?
There's a lot of, on the rationale for the data collection, and it's especially coming on to Annex 2, which was released, well, approved last week. So Annex 2 of the ICH E6R3 has come out. It's how that data is collected, how the risk mitigation of the data. It's all around the data that's being collected. Are we ensuring that it is of quality data that can actually then lead through to the CSR? And that's the medical writer's responsibility to make sure that that's written in within the protocol and then taken through the other documents in the trial, because obviously the SAP is involved as well.
And I think it's important to align as much as possible with standard of care in real world medicine. So, for example, in oncology studies where you have a lot of imaging, if that imaging is not at the same time points that it would be clinically, you're almost certainly not going to get it at those time points, particularly in managed systems like the NHS. So I think that's an important thing, looking at that schedule of events and saying, does this mimic real world care? And in general, that aside, doing as much as you can to minimize the number of visits, the number of things happening at each visit, the blood draws particularly, obviously, and just the overall complexity, because complexity acts against quality, basically. And I think you can sort of often tell looking at a very complex, and some protocols and some things that need to be complex. There's just no two ways about it. But to the extent that we can try to get people to minimize that, to balance the things Jules was talking about before, all the nice to knows against what you really need to know, because every one of those nice to knows adds to patient burden, adds to costs at every level, whether that's DM or stats or CSR writing or, you know, whatever, monitoring. So you know, you try to avoid these Christmas tree protocols where everyone hangs on one more endpoint. They're not going to work, and we know that, and we've seen it happen over and over again.
Yeah, and I think my show notes over here have clarity, consistency, and I think we'll talk about that later in another section as well. But is the protocol very, very clear on what's happening? Can people read it and understand? Or are you using phrases though, oh, they'll know what we mean, or you know, sites have done this before, it'll be perfectly clear, or stats will figure that out later. Like, those are signals that it's not as tightly written and as clear as it can be. And I really, we joke about how low tech it is, but it actually does make sense, where Anne is making her table and saying the endpoint, you know, the schedule of events, the stats, like, can you align all of those items and be consistent throughout the protocol document, because then you know that it's clear and consistent within itself. Whether it's correct or as right as it should be is a different question, but at least you've tackled the consistency component.
One of the places that consistency is really a problem is footnotes for the schedule of assessments. And I don't know, Anne, if you've seen that somebody makes a change and you have to change all your numbers all the way through. I really, really like, and not many people have adopted it yet, the notes column at the end of this. Yeah. So you don't have these numbers, you just have the note for the specific assessment on the schedule of assessment, and it gets rid of all that inconsistency because you haven't updated your footnotes because it's on that line with the assessment. I think that's for quality, that is hands down the best thing that I've seen for a very long time.
Well, and then it's not written in that size 1 font underneath that.
Exactly, and nobody reads it, and then you have to make sure that that is also matching up with the main body of the protocol. And if it's been missed on QC, then you've got sites doing one thing and the other sites doing another thing. It's footnotes are the bane of a medical writer's life.
And my kind of rule on that, I like the idea about the notes column. This is going to sound very silly and again low tech. I have this thing that the entire SOA goes on one page; it never goes on to a second page. Footnotes arguably might, but that's sort of, so that if you can see it, you know what I mean. In a schedule assessment that goes over 6 or 7 pages, and I think we've all seen that, is useless. The person at the site can't say, well, am I doing a physical first or revise slides? What? Yeah. Oh, I got to do all these things on this day. Which do I do first? But anything, my other rule about footnotes, getting to what you said, Jules, is there's almost nothing in the footnotes that is also anywhere else in the protocol. Because to me, the schedule of events is a schedule. It tells you the timing of those events. Your section 8, as it usually is now, tells you how to do that event. You will do a 12-lead ECG and you will measure these intervals, but never in that section would I mention the time. So I do everything I can to put, the right information in the right place so as not to do that. You obviously cannot totally eliminate it, but it's just really important. I think it's a big thing in writing quality protocols is not to repeat, because if you repeat, you almost certainly will get the problem you're talking about. And it's, how do I know? Because I've done it many times.
Well, I think that's a lesson that transcends medical writing and protocols, and generally all of life is. But any document that you're writing, the more that you repeat, or the more you repeat the same thing in different documents, is the more you're opening up the door for inconsistencies and confusion. So E6R3
and M11 has helped. I was going to say M11 has helped a bit. I mean, I think. Again, good medical writers were always good at structuring protocols in a way that minimized repeats. But M11 is a good tool for perhaps a less experienced writer to sort of get things in the place where they go and not repeat all over the place. And to argue back, because then because I'll have people like try to put things in multiple places, and I'd always argue against that. And they'll say, but the reader will be asking the question when they read this. And I'm like, well, I don't think they will, because I think they'll go to the schedule for timing and they'll go to this section for this. And if they don't, then force them to, I always try to have the reader in mind, but, they're adults. They should go to the right place and not have to be spoon-fed the same information in multiple sections.
This is a little bit of a tangent, so I don't want to drift too far into the AI discussion. But I met a few weeks ago with a really interesting company that is using AI to operationalize or put in place a lot of information and from the clinical protocol. And what was fascinating to me is they had gone to all of the protocols that are published on clinicaltrials.gov and run it through their tool and noted all of the errors that were in these protocols and ranked them by criticality, like really should have been fixed, right? Like this was a big problem. So this should have been done. And it was shocking when I was looking at this data of the number of companies involved, because basically every company, like including the big guys, and the number of errors that are still working their way through protocols. And, we can say error, but what we really mean is some sort of level of inconsistency that is introducing confusion into your protocol. And so how do you avoid that? I think, we talk about E6R3 really emphasizing proportionate risk-based approaches. I mean, E6 has been doing that all along, and I feel like each time there's an R added, we mean it this time. So we'll see how it goes. And but it's challenging kind of that all or nothing thinking, and this is the way we've always done it thinking. But that can introduce some conflict and some conversation around how do you distinguish and manage the tension between what's required, what's expected, and what is simply habit.
I think one of the big things that the E6R3 brings out is reducing site burden and reducing patient burden. So just because it's always been done doesn't mean necessarily that it should be done. I mean, I'm talking about vital signs being done every day in a hospital visit on top of standard of care. Doesn't need to be done. The vital signs have been checked already during the rounds or by the nurse. So I think we all have to have a responsibility to look at the protocol and see, does this mean that a lot of burden for the site? Because if it's a burden for the site, assessments might be missed. Assessments might be done at the wrong time because it's burdensome for the site. And is it burdensome for the patient? Because burdensome for the patient means dropouts, and then we don't have, again, the quality data. So it's whether it's something's always been done, it's now we have to move with the times and say, this is how it should be done from now on.
I couldn't agree more. I think those are the most dangerous words in all of clinical research. This is how we've always done it. The example I always give is some years ago, I did an 85,000 patient study that enrolled in a matter of months, 85,000 people, and followed them for 7 years, and they were elderly. And people would say things over the many years we were doing this. Well, that's how we've always done it. And I was younger and probably snarkier, but I would always say, is that the way you did it when you did your last 85,000 subject study? Because not something that's right for a 24 patient healthy volunteer study is not necessarily right for an 85,000 patient study with old people, the elderly. So, I mean, so for example, in that study, there were 3,000 deaths, completely expected. People over 65, it went on for 7 years and had 85,000 people. You're not going to write 3,000 narratives for every, and the regulators won't mind. Nowhere in the world does it say you have to. So, we always write narratives for deaths. Okay, well, the last time you had 3,000 deaths in a study, did you write a narrative for every one? So I think I always try to redirect those. This is the way we've always done it to what's appropriate for this study in this population, in this disease. And because people, and it usually comes from people who are not so experienced, fall back on that a lot. And it's really the experienced people who can tell you, who are not just saying, well, we've done it that way, we'll do it that way again. It's what's right for this study. And as you said, E6R3 is a lot about that. I hope it gets us better at that, but not.
Well, I mean, that's what the revisions to E6 have been trying to get us to do. What is correct for this study and where you are and how you are approaching it. And it is still can be very uncomfortable. Some companies do a lot better with embracing it, and other companies are like, well, this has been working so far. So until there's a requirement from the regulators that we must do this, then we'll keep doing along. Okay.
It's interesting what you say, because I think those are the second most dangerous words in clinical research. It's worked so far, because usually it isn't working. People, it amazes me. I've really only ever worked in this industry, so I don't know if it's different in other industries, but it amazes me the amount of crap or unpleasant work that people are used to. Protocol deviations, people are used to protocol amendments, people are used to CSRs that are tricky to write, and I don't understand why that's acceptable. I mean, obviously in many cases those things might be necessary, but often not. And so the other sort of strategy I have is to say, well, that's the way you've always done it, but it results in this thing that you don't like, that I know from, the last CSR we wrote together that you didn't like that. Well, that's how. So that, I think that can work too, is urging people to write to design a study specifically for the right thing, but also reminding them how these things are related and how these choices get them to places they don't like. So
yeah, I think there's always going to be deviations. There's always going to be data anomalies. Especially if you're in oncology, there's always going to be amendments. But it's like how are you? The dangerous word is, let's just get the protocol finalized and we'll handle that in an amendment.
That's
like if you know you need to fix it before you introduce a lot of confusion and headache, internally to data management teams is my first thought. But the real first thought is a lot of confusion and frustration for sites and patients, because you don't need to purposely introduce that. Okay, so last word on protocol templates here. Do they work for or against risk proportionate thinking by encouraging teams to address and include everything?
Wow, that's a question, isn't it? I think the regulators expect everything to be included. The regulators expect. And if we look at ICFs, the regulators expect everything to be included. Now, whether that makes it a patient-friendly document in the ICF stage, or whether that makes it an operationally viable protocol, that's where the divergence comes. And so ICFs, you'll find, are approaching 30 pages now. Nobody's going to read those. Nobody is going to read an ICF that is 30 pages long. And so there is information in there that the patient participant will be signing and not knowing. A site, when an investigator who's reading a protocol that's so many pages long with useless information for him, is not going to take in all that information. That's where you get deviations. That's where you get things being done different ways at different sites. So it's a balance. It's a real strong balance between meeting regulatory requirements and also doing something that can be operationalized and easy to read from the site's point of view and DM's point of view, obviously, as well.
And I think, I'm particularly whenever I'm teaching, when I'm writing protocols or when I'm teaching about writing protocols, I'm always reminding people of the multiple audiences for this document. And you need to feed all of those audiences. You need to have enough stuff in there to allow somebody to design a CRF, to allow somebody to write a SAP. But I think I do think very strongly that we must remember who the primary audience is, which is the site. And we have to write a document they can use for the reasons you say, Jules, to not have inconsistent performance, to not have protocol deviations, because to be honest, if the data are not sufficient quality, the rest of it doesn't matter. How good a CRF is built, how good a stats plan, it doesn't matter. So I think we've sort of gotten away in a lot of ways from that, remembering who the primary audience for the protocol is. And I actually have beef with M11 about that, but we'll probably get to that.
I don't know. Now I want to hear it. We'll see if it comes out. So, obviously M11 is trying to make protocols more consistent and electronically exchangeable, but not all the content of a protocol is suitable for reuse or plug and play, as they may say. So what content around a protocol makes you nervous if it just gets reused without thought?
I think endpoints. I think just to have bog standard endpoints that haven't been carefully thought out for the individual study is something that really does concern me, because endpoints are very specific. The schedule of assessments we build based on the endpoints, but the endpoints are the main point of your protocol. And if they're just bog standard copied from one to another, not really, and there is always a danger if there's a plug and play that people won't edit and won't look at and won't investigate further about whether that is really truly what should be the endpoint for the study.
Although I do think that it is, I completely agree with that. And given what I've said about how endpoints are usually badly written, I couldn't say more than Jules says. But I do think, particularly if you have smaller companies working in limited therapeutic areas, it might be useful to have standard wording on them. Again, they might change, but that that you might have 100 endpoints you could choose from in a certain indicator, and that they aren't just worded. There was, I remember there was a presentation at the most recent M1 that someone had reviewed a bunch of protocols and found something like 100 different ways that highly effective contraception had been phrased in a protocol. It's one of my bugbears is the contraception section. And there really is no reason for that. There's no reason I can think of that you're, across a company, once you decide what you consider highly effective contraception, that sentence should, or that paragraph of that should be the same in every protocol. With the only exception being if you don't have both men and women in a protocol, then the methods are a little bit different if you have only men or only women. But that aside, yeah. So I think, but in terms of stuff that you can reuse with sort of less oversight is really only that last section, the trial oversight and other general considerations, although even that section has to be reviewed for sure, because your consent section, you might need to add assent language or emergency consent language or whatever. So there's really there's certainly nothing you could reuse without looking at it. But
so even when you have structured protocol content, this is not a trick question, by the way. I think it is. Who owns it? Who owns the protocol content, structured or not structured? Is it medical writing, clinical development, regulatory? Who owns that document?
I would say the synopsis and the concept is owned by clinical development and the medics. The protocol is owned by the medical writer until they hand it off as final, then it's owned by the medic on the study.
I like that. That makes a lot of sense. Interestingly, if I heard this correctly at the M1 conference, M11 itself was written with no medical writers on board, which made all the medical writers in the group, in the audience, kind of look at each other like, and I think that's the extreme. I think the medical writer is the owner. Interestingly enough, M11 development group didn't think the same, but.
Is that's true? Medical M11 didn't.
No, I think didn't we have one member from the M11 working group, and she is a medical writer.
Okay.
Ether. She was a medical writer. She was a member of the M11 working group.
She was. Yeah, it was the person who kind of led it that said that there wasn't medical writing involved.
That's more from the
you're absolutely right.
The digital elements of the M11 haven't had medical writing input up till now, but I think they're moving forward with asking for medical writing input. I think that they've realized that as we're the ones who are dealing with these documents, and it's not a question of in all AI, anything, it's not a question of just putting it in and the medical writer will just say, yeah, that's fine, and move on to the next section. That's not what we do. And so,
okay, so to clarify, like M11 had medical writers involved, but the CDISC and Transcelerate initiative has not up until now, but you expect that to change.
They have asked for volunteers, and on their recent webinar, CDISC had a recent webinar, and they have asked for volunteers from the medical writing community to be involved in the future development, which is a great step forward.
Good job. Okay, so medical writers own the protocol when they're writing it.
In our minds.
When it's in development.
In our minds,
yes. But where is their actual authority? What do they have authority over during development, and what can they only influence?
I think we can only influence because it's not our product, not our style, not our study. We can only influence, we can only advise. We can't actually dictate anything, can we? I wouldn't feel comfortable because then we don't have that stake in it. We have the stake in making sure that the protocol is fit for purpose. We don't have the the stake that the study is fit for purpose.
So what a tightrope to walk for a medical writer, because you own the document, but you actually have no final authority, shall we say, in terms of the content beyond the regular, I mean, not beyond, maybe it's not minimal, but, you know, making sure it's compliant with the regulatory requirements.
Yeah, and I think again, as usual, completely agree with Jules. But I do think we should exert influence in the study design being fit for purpose as well. Again, our only responsibility, I agree with you, is the document. But as I think you said earlier, we've seen more protocols than most people. And so we have a lot of experience of what works and doesn't work. And we see them often in sort of retrospect when we're writing CSRs and other things. So we really know what doesn't work. And so I do think that's useful. And I think that, and this has been a major learning curve for me, we have to come to the table with that sense of maybe not authority, but well, I would say authority in our own area, and that we are experts in our own area, because a lot of those, you know, people are coming to the table quite reasonably as experts in the medical indication that we're talking about, in clinical development in general, and certainly in stats and other things. But I think that we're still having to assert our authority, assert our expertise. We bring an expertise to the table that I think, to be frank, this might be my own thing, but I feel is largely unrecognized. So we have to speak with and again, this has been a thing for me, learning to speak with that authority and learning to speak as an expert, not as a servant to the team. We are a servant to the team, and I'm very interested in being a servant to the team and getting everyone's consensus and getting everyone's expertise, but we are also coming with an expertise set.
And that consensus building, for me, becomes really important in this new age of medical writing under these guidelines, because you have to have a document that's fit for purpose. You have to take a risk-based approach to it, and you have to ensure that it has a quality underpinning. It has to have quality by design. Protocol needs to be well written so the study can be well executed. And as the owner of that document, you know, you have that authority and responsibility for making sure that it is quality. So how you get the consensus and how you resolve all the conflicting comments and how you get clarity in some fuzzy wording all become integral to quality by design for the actual running of the clinical trial.
Yeah, and I think if you speak to a lot of teams, a lot of because everyone thinks they can do medical writing. Well, I think we spoke about that before. It's so easy. It's such an easy role, and it's the easiest role in clinical research.
I've been writing since I was 5. Right?
Exactly, anyone can do it. But I think if you speak to a team who've had to deal with somebody else writing the protocol, where that, however well intentioned to write the protocol, and then they work with the medical writer, they will, and it's so much more efficient. It's so much more efficient, and you get the end product with a better quality.
Then you will love this next question, and I think we tackled it the first time we spoke as a group. Also, sorry, my cat just fell off the desk. Didn't quite make the jump. You talk about, like, medical writers are not document processors, right? They bring a lot to the table. But if you think about, now we have this template, so maybe we don't need medical writers. So what's really going to separate a strong protocol writer during the R3 M11 era of medical writing?
I'll let you go first, Dan.
Well, this is, we were talking yesterday, Amanda, about hot takes, and here my hot takes is the same skills that always have. That has not changed. And those are, in my mind, and I'm sure Jules will have more to add, understanding and representing the needs of site staff and other users of the protocol, and actually site staff, patients, and other users, or participants rather, and other users of the protocol, including data management, including stats, including the down the road CSR writer, including the down the road manuscript writer. The ability to write in clear and concise and consistent and unambiguous language, and the people skills, being able to manage this team, build consensus, ask challenging questions, ask stupid questions, um, and one that I think is also really unrecognized is the ability to manage up. Often the people that you're sort of trying to build a consensus among, or asking these difficult questions to, are, to be frank, more highly placed in the organization than we are, and not everyone can do that. So it's that combination of just sort of general organizational and writing and people skills that have always been the basis of medical writing, and I think that remains unchanged.
And I would just say that a lazy medical writer or a medical writer who doesn't understand that that is our role will be found out very quickly, because templates are great, but they don't fit 99.9% of studies. So we have to change and we have to adapt everything. So if you think you're just going to plonk some text in and that's it, then that's medical writing maybe not for you.
All I can think about is having an SAP template and people just plopping things in there. And, I think a template is a starting point to help you think about what you need to have included. But what actually gets included, is, I was going to say standardized, and that's of course not what I meant, but is specific to each study. It's custom for each study. That's the word I was trying to get through. Okay, so 5 years into the future, maybe everything will be the same, because goodness knows our industry is not known for the speed at which it adapts to change. But 5 years into the future, what do you think a protocol writer, or a medical writer for that matter, will need to know that maybe they don't need to worry about so much today?
I think without doubt they will need to know how to use AI within their working practice. I mean, AI is here to stay. It's not going to replace medical writers, but we have to learn how to use AI within our working practice. And I would say that would maybe even before 5 years.
Yeah, that's very close. And my own thinking at the moment, which may very much change in 5 years, is not using it for writing, but that it's a much better research tool than we've been able to access in the past. And I ask it a lot of questions, but I personally don't ever use it to write something. But who knows? I may change in that when certain tools become available. One thing that I was thinking about after hearing a lot about M11 at the MWA conference was the issue, and again, I don't know that this will happen in 5 years for the reasons Amanda has said. We don't move that fast. But my understanding of the whole trajectory of M11 is to move towards a machine-readable document. And the reasons for that are several, which is like to populate regulatory authority databases and to enable sort of estimates and proposals by various CROs, DM, stats, operational, whatever. So I focus a lot, I think I've said this already, on the clarity and simplicity of the schedule of activities, for, among other reasons, besides compliance, obviously. I think it's one of the main tools that sites and CROs and other service providers use for costing and for assigning resource. So I feel like, personally, that I do that very well for a human reader, because I've done it a lot. And I think I know what the humans are looking for when they're trying to do those things. But I think that I, in the next 5 years, need to understand more about how machines read things, so that when we're really writing protocols for machines, God help us, I understand how they read, because I know how humans read. But
so I love that, because now the main audience has shifted from the site to the machine, which it shouldn't. I mean, I think it's always going to be. It
shouldn't, but
I, for one, welcome our new
we better be ready.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, there is a lot of, if you talk about that schedule of events or schedule of activities that really drives so much. And it really does. I mean, when I've done costing and I'm counting up things off that SOA and figuring out how many forms we're going to have and how's that translate into the number of tables and listings and figures. And There's a lot that goes through that. I think sites use it as well to figure out what they should be doing and when, which is another reason why that footnote double J that says the third visit EKG must be done before the vital signs, but only at that visit is so complicated. But I think it does become important to make sure that these things are structured in a way that can be shared easily. And I guess that's going to be via machines, which will also go back to Jules' comment about AI, because I frequently say, AI will impact resourcing among all of us in clinical research, but the good people who, are moving forward are knowing how to use AI to get what they want out of it and help make their jobs better. And I think the consistency component that we were talking about earlier is where various models can really contribute. If you have this protocol, find all the inconsistencies of the SOA, match what is going on in the text. And, that can save a lot of downstream frustration and errors and confusion by, using it up front. I think it's also, I know very little about the connection from CDISC and Transcelerate and the M11 template. Obviously, it's what I'll be learning about in July. But, I think building that standard will help the data be processed more quickly and reported more quickly and consistently, which is ultimately a good thing. Last words from either one of you?
I think the medical writing profession is growing. If anyone wants to join the medical writing profession, it's not going to be destroyed by AI. It's not going to be destroyed by a digital protocol and a digital protocol program that's being announced. We're very much still needed and very much still needing to be trained and upskilled. And we welcome any newcomers.
Such a good point, Jules, because a protocol is but one document that a medical writer owns. And any last
the need is, I can only echo that. The need just grows exponentially for medical writing. And what these tools do, M11 for protocols, the core reference, which we may have mentioned in the previous call for CSRs, I think is really support the more junior writer. I mean, I can write a good CSR and I can write a good protocol because of all of my experience. And a lot of that experience, as we've discussed, is things that went wrong. And without, whereas I think these tools really are there to support more junior people in a field that is growing too fast, to be honest. And so there are things that's where their function is really to help the growth that we need.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I just want to say thank you both very much for joining me today and talking about medical writing and R3 and M11. And if anybody has any questions that we didn't get to, just drop me a line and let me know. And otherwise, thank you so much to Jules and Anne, and I hope everybody has a great rest of their day.